I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and offer some initial reactions to this bill. Today we're talking about a piece of legislation that has a big name, and it raises some really important issues. However, its format as an omnibus bill is really going to limit Nova Scotians' ability to engage with all of the important issues that are in here. There's been lots written about the abuse of omnibus bills. Omnibus bills should be used rarely. I understand that for those of you new to government and those of you new, it would seem to be the habit of this government to push everything together in an omnibus bill, search for a way to connect everything, and then it makes it faster, right? It makes it faster for government to get this through the House. So instead of having to talk about each separate bill and actually explain the background behind it. I mean, the minister offered nothing on the Crown Lands Act, offered nothing on the Conservation Act. There was literally nothing. I don't know if the other minister is planning to rise and speak to that, but that's very little information. And then public bills will be scheduled probably on Monday. And instead of having the opportunity for all the various stakeholders who all have a piece of this, yes, they can all come in, but it doesn't allow for rational public discussion of these issues. So I have lots of questions. I mean, I do think that I would be remiss by not talking about the fact that this government is abusing the use of omnibus bills. It's also politically very helpful, right? Because then if we vote against something in an omnibus bill, then we can be accused of voting against everything. Honestly, we're not that worried about it. Like, people can take shots at us in the House, and it really doesn't bother us because we know that our record with stakeholders is clear. Yeah. So, but I think, honestly, I think Nova Scotians deserve a lot better than this. So we're really concerned, and we are concerned about the changes in the Residential Tenancies Act with regard to borders. Now, I find this interesting because obviously this government wasted a bunch of money on Happy Pad, and that didn't work out. And here we are again trying to get at the issue of having people stay in your homes. But what this is doing is really stripping away the rights of renters who rent a space in someone else's home. And often these are people who are already in vulnerable situations. So seniors, students, people working minimum wage or temporary position, folks who are trying to move here to Nova Scotia but they can't afford to get a new apartment, and those who rely on income assistance. And under this bill, these folks will actually lose rent cap provisions. And so in what way does this help our affordability crisis? I know that the government recently tabled the report about all the housing starts and housing finishes. But the fact of the matter is that we have rising homelessness. The fact of the matter is that the wait list for public housing is exploding. The fact of the matter is that there is housing being built, but it's not solving the problem. So it's not getting the results for Nova Scotians that people need. And this is one more thing that is going to make it hard for people to afford accommodation. We'll lose rent cap protections. That really doesn't make any sense at all. I would invite the minister to explain how losing the rent cap provisions as a border helps protect Nova Scotians. They can be evicted with just 7 days notice. Again, I would invite the minister to explain how that's protecting Nova Scotians. Landlords will no longer need cause or oversight from the Director of Residential Tenancies. Again, can the minister explain this? These are really complex issues that affect the day-to-day lives of Nova Scotians who are trying to live, work, play, grow, be educated in this province, and we need to hear more about them. For many, if boarding is the way that they're searching for housing stability, this is actually making it less stable. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially for a government that spent a bunch of money on a sole source contract that generated nothing from Happy Pad, which was in fact a boarding type of situation. In the last term, the government was big fans of borders. don't know what happened. And again, it would be great to hear more about this. I wanted to touch on the Crown Land Act's amendments. Now, we haven't heard from a minister about these, so it's not clear, what all the goals are. But the bill does make sweeping changes to the Crown Lands Act, and we have lots of questions about that. So it's already illegal to block access to forestry roads. What does this act? What do these changes do that are different than that, and why? What who's been spoken to? What stakeholders have been spoken to? This government has a history of hiding a lot of the information that the folks who work in our forests and the folks who rely on our forests for food, for hunting, keeping a lot of the information secret. So we're not telling people where spraying is happening anymore. There's concern in Cape Breton about the moose hunt and moose habitat. There's information that Natural Resources has collected that they haven't shared. But if there's data, why aren't we hearing about this? And again, having this buried in an omnibus bill limits debate. It absolutely achieves the political aims of this government, 100%. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't guarantee that we're making laws that are lasting, that are well thought out, and that take into account the views of stakeholders. I think we should all be concerned about some of the language in the bill. So the minister, under this proposed bill, only has to believe that access is being blocked in ways that harm the economic interests of the Crown. It's a very broad provision. I would love to hear from some legal experts about what that all means. But I think we have to be very clear. This is about making it harder for protest. And if we think about what's happening in Cape Breton right now, it's just another place where the Mi'kmaq have stood up and said, they're not being heard, that this government is not respecting their rights. So, I think that this is about limiting people's ability to engage when they feel like there's no other choices, right? So this is the other thing, is I don't think people have gone up in Cape Breton to block roads because they feel like, they probably feel like they've tried and tried and tried. They've wanted transparency from government. They've wanted transparency from natural resources. They want to understand what happened with the most recent moose study and the health of the population. And they're not getting that. And so if you don't share with citizens, with the people of Nova Scotia, the information they need to make decisions, then they have to make other choices. So I think when the government closes off every avenue for dialogue, people feel that protesting is their only option. And since everybody's been tagged with the special interest, let's not forget that everyone's a special interest. Which is despicable language, actually, which was offensive language to have included in a speech from the throne, and then in a formal budget speech and budget documents from this government. I do not understand a government that would use that language. But it's clear that that's what you think, or that's what the government thinks, because that's how you're treating people, by not consulting, by not talking to people, by not sharing the scientific information that you've gathered in Mi'kma'ki with the Mi'kmaq people to help make decisions together. I think some of the other pieces, again, demonstrate why rushing this all together in an omnibus bill actually really limits and does a disservice to people and their concerns. So of course we're happy to see the changes around the Residential Tenancies Act and survivors of gender-based violence. However, there were other things that we understood from stakeholders were very important that were not included in this bill. Again, it's an omnibus bill. I doubt the Minister for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women is going to stand up, but we have to make sure we're making laws that don't go halfway or that have unintended consequences. And by cramming this all in and giving it a limited amount of debate, I don't think that we're doing our jobs as legislators. I think we need to know more, understand more. We need to hear from stakeholders. And I think we risk making bad laws when we don't. Under the Medical Health Information Act, the removal of the word imminent from the provisions of being able for medical professionals to reach out to family or friends for support. So this is something that the Nova Scotia moms have been working on. The Nova Scotia moms are a group of people who have been affected by suicide, mostly in their young people, so their children or nephews or nieces. Some of them were here actually on the day that the house opened. They didn't want to be publicly recognized because, in fact, for a couple of them, there are some recent losses that they're very concerned about. They've done an incredible amount of work on this issue. They have pushed government to consider this, and honestly, you're not doing what they asked for. The government is not actually legislating what they asked for. So but if we had time to understand why, so if someone from the government would stand up and say, we understand that there was public discussion about removing words like danger and imminent, and we undertook consultation, we spoke to our legal experts, and this is why we've only chosen imminent, that would be helpful to this debate. At this point, we can't assume that that's the case. And so we have to view this legislation with some skepticism of why it's not going as far as some stakeholders think it should, and what does that mean for implementation. And then, again, also, if the minister would stand and talk to that, like, has the Association of Psychiatrists or Psychologists of Nova Scotia been contacted? Like, who's been talked to about this change? Or was it just kind of like, we'll just sort of take that little one as a quick political win? The stakeholder group is good at putting lots of pressure on us, and we'll go from there. Similarly, the work around security at bars and restaurants and cabarets, so around accountability of security services there. What's being proposed doesn't meet what stakeholders have been asking for. Why? I mean, it is a reasonable question to ask why. And again, because it's buried in this bill, I'm going to talk about this bill for, 15 minutes tonight, 16 minutes. And I doubt that all the ministers implicated in this bill are going to stand up and provide answers for what choices were made, what's the policy rationale, what are the expected results, why X instead of Y. These are things that we should all understand before we vote for something. Again, this does a disservice. And the provisions around protecting the social insurance numbers, so what we've proposed actually goes farther. We think that Nova Scotia Power should be forced to get rid of everybody's social insurance numbers. At this point, this legislation does not do that, so they can still keep them. We think that we have a number of other things that we think should be put in there to strengthen people's privacy protection. And again, we don't know why these choices were made. There's no policy rationale, and there's no opportunity to engage Nova Scotians. And I think on Nova Scotia Power and the fact that most of us have our SIN numbers leaked through a cybersecurity breach, I mean, this is a major issue for Nova Scotians. This will, and I don't know who's all, I assume there's lots of us in this room who have been affected by that, who have had a Nova Scotia Power account at one point or the other in their name and provided their SIN because, well, you want power in Nova Scotia, so you gotta go through Nova Scotia Power. So whether that seemed like an irrational thing to ask for or not, you gave it. This will actually follow you for the rest of your life. So it's out there. This is not something that our 5-year credit check is, hopefully it catches it for 5 years, but this will literally follow Nova Scotians for the rest of their lives and put them at increased risk of financial fraud for the rest of their lives. And yet this government is not choosing to do all that it can to make sure that Nova Scotia Power rectifies the situation and that Nova Scotians aren't put at risk again. So what ties all of these measures together is not protection. I would argue that it doesn't provide enough rationale or background. The connections aren't there. This should not be an omnibus bill. I think it's a bill that reflects this government keeping information from Nova Scotians, resisting transparency, and bringing forward catch-all bills that then they can fly through legislation. It's true. It's true. The goal of having this be law by next week, Yeah, probably on track for that, because of course if I spoke for too long, we could be also like lose our minutes to speak. So I guess I'm wondering how people feel about that. Do you think Nova Scotians are happy with that you're shoving a bill in for things that are really important? Domestic violence, security when folks are out downtown at bars and that sort of stuff. People who are in a mental health crisis. Like, these are really serious issues, and I doubt that anyone in this legislature, including myself at this point, could explain all the rationale behind all of the pieces. But if you're comfortable standing up and making a law for Nova Scotians without really knowing the background and the information, the evidence, or what stakeholders think, I mean, I worry for Nova Scotians. I worry for Nova Scotians' law, and we should take our role much more seriously. Nova Scotians need a government that listens and engages and treats with respect the role of lawmaking, and not legislate in a way that closes doors and weakens protections.